Dominic, while we are talking around the energy issues, and we know that that is the engine that makes the economy turn, let's focus the attention on business. The understanding is that just before COVID, South Africa had some 70 companies operating in Uganda, and the expectation is that both countries will be keen to expand the presence in the business sector in each other's markets. Let's talk about the sectors of the economy where, for example, South Africa would want to be keen to explore in Uganda.
I think we must take a step back, Polly, and problematize the reason why South Africa needs to expand its operations into the African continent and the modalities through which it's done. And what we've seen is that South African companies have played a regressive role in many African countries and is often advancing increased conflict. For example, in Cabo Delgado in Mozambique is one instance of this. And what's behind this is the failure to develop local markets and sufficient buying power within our countries, within the African continent. And so a bigger emphasis ought to be on strengthening local industrialization programs, which includes increased localization to ensure that we can create large amounts of jobs and increase domestic buying power and breaking the dependence on export-led growth models.
Interesting indeed. And Uganda, vice versa, what economic opportunities do they think they can extract from South Africa?
Similarly, I mean, it's rooted in the same point. We think that Uganda has lots of possibilities to develop their own agricultural and energy sectors without being reliant on exports from the South African continent, from South Africa, sorry, not the continent. And in that way, breaking the dependency on the big private capital that we're seeing is increasingly pervasive within the continent.
Yeah, and just as we are talking, Dominic, and the delegations there moving inside, on the side of the screen there, the jobless rate in South Africa, in other words, unemployment has dropped to 32.7%. Stats saying that 169,000 more jobs were created in the fourth quarter of 2022. That's good news for South Africa, but that is exactly what South Africa needs to keep encouraging. But I suspect the energy issues are going to, again, be a drag, is it not?
Absolutely, but just it will reduce productivity in the country as long as load shedding persists. I think everyone recognizes the detrimental impact that the energy crisis has on the economy. Just on the quarterly labor force survey results that just been released, it's important to recognize that the fourth quarter includes Black Friday and the December holidays. And so this is generally a period where there's higher levels of consumer demand, which could help to boost some levels of job creation. But this must be situated in a context where we have more than 11 million people who are unemployed, and 75% of them have been unemployed for more than 1 year. So we need much greater levels of job creation, and this won't be done based on the current economic model where we're seeing major budget cuts as well as regressive monetary policy through huge interest rate hikes. So all of these things together, the budget cuts plus regressive monetary policy coupled with the load shedding crisis is the problem. But we could change this and invest a lot more through a fiscal stimulus program invest in implementing a basic income grant to reduce the levels of hunger and precarity. This could also have a multiplier effect where it can create local demand and thereby spurring local job creation. But this should be done along with large levels of investment in infrastructure. And if we look at levels of infrastructure going into gross fixed capital formation, in other words, investments in the real economy, they have been stagnating and declining in real terms. And this is a major problem. We need to invest in public health care, in education, and in advancing a transition to a low-carbon economy, but on a public pathway approach.
Yeah. While on trade-related opportunities between South Africa and Uganda, Dominic, interesting point that these two countries are hoping to increase trade on, and these are opportunities in the tourism sector, correctional services. That piques my interest, by the way. Correctional services, what kind of relations or trade relations might be explored in that regard, correctional services?
Yeah, this is actually quite worrying. I don't know the particulars of this, and so I think it's not advisable for me to comment. But going back to an earlier point, I know, for instance, the SANDF has been deployed in Mozambique to protect South Africa's investments, quote-unquote investments in Mozambique. And so we see a repressive role played by the South African police in some of these African countries. So without commenting on the particularities, I think we must be wary that South Africa is not advancing greater levels of conflict in other parts of the continent.
Well, that would be worrying indeed, and perhaps by so doing, you are swaying this conversation toward an earlier discussion I had, in fact, our colleague had, with the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, when a question was asked about whether it is ideal for South Africa to increase trade with a country that is clearly projected to becoming slightly repressive, because they have now just shut down the office of the United Nations Human Rights Office, and this is on the back of reported human rights abuses in Uganda. Is this the kind of trading partner that South Africa would want to increase trade with on the back of what we know to be South Africa's foreign policy outlook, which is anchored on human rights?
No, absolutely. I think you make a very good point, Polly. And I think a similar kind of response should go or be held in relation to Israel and Palestine, where we have these types of conflicts and human rights abuses. And we shouldn't be trading or engaging in trade agreements with these types of countries where there are human rights abuses. Again, I think I haven't been following exactly what's been happening in relation to Uganda in this regard, but based on what you say, it seems like a worrying trend.
And Minister Pandor saying to my colleague that, well, South Africa is not a nanny state. We're not going to police what other countries do. Uganda is a sovereign state. That kind of response, what do you make of it?
I mean, during apartheid, imagine other countries had taken a similar position. I think we would have taken umbrage given the atrocities of the apartheid government. And it was extremely important when sanctions were imposed on the apartheid government to increase economic pressures as part of different aspects of what drove to the ending of apartheid. But of course, this was one aspect. And I think similarly, we should see the same kind of principle being applied in situations where we do see clear-cut evidence of human rights abuses by nation states.
Well, but someone listening to us is going to say, look, you guys are trying to push the South African government to do what is frankly beyond its scope. As Naledi Pandor said, that we're not going to police how other countries behave, and perhaps that kind of response, it is to be expected given our stance on the Russia-Ukraine conflict. South Africa's position is that we are non-allied, but we will allow for military drills in South Africa by the Russian state along with China. Is South Africa's foreign policy outlook slowly moving away from that anchor I spoke about earlier, which is that of observing human rights?
I think we're moving into a situation globally where there's rising geopolitical context. And I do believe that the South African government has taken some questionable decisions in relation to these matters. So yes, I think, and contradictory, if anything, and perhaps erring on the side of being disingenuous, given that we're allowing, for example, military drills to take place here, while saying we are non-aligned and observing. And just to say, we don't have to be a nanny state and prescribe to another country what they can or cannot do. But as a state, we can decide on what basis and with whom we will have engagements with. And in instances where we see that other states do not align with human rights laws, we can, as a state, decide not to engage with them as a statement of intent to advance human rights laws and to have impunity for those who actually engage within human rights abuses.
Yeah. Dominic Brown, let me thank you very much for your time and insights. He is a program manager at the Alternative Information and Development Center. Thanks indeed for your contribution. All right.